All right, you're rolling.
Okay. All right, guys, thank you for helping me out with this. This is my last speech for class this term. This is my persuasive speech. Thank you for giving me your time this afternoon. So, how many here have been vaccinated? Everybody had their childhood vaccinations? Okay, great. Does anybody have any direct information, contact with someone who has died from a childhood disease in the continental United States in their lifetime? No. Why?
Vaccination.
There we go, exactly, because we have a very effective vaccination program in the United States. It's been in effect since roughly 1940s, 1950s, and it's done wonders to eliminate or eradicate childhood diseases. Nobody hears about measles, mumps, rubella, typhoid, diphtheria, all these things. We don't hear about those too much anymore. How is it now lately we're seeing an upsurge in measles outbreaks, whooping cough? You hear about that now more in the news. Right now, cities like New York City, Santa Clara, California, towns in Washington, Michigan, and Oregon, all these states are seeing an upsurge in measles outbreaks. And the outbreaks are getting to such proportions, the CDCs are calling them epidemics. And people are starting to die. Our vulnerable populations are starting to die. So, why is it we now have an upsurge in diseases that previously were eradicated in the United States? We didn't have a problem with them. Any ideas?
Anti-vaxxers.
There we go. Anti-vaxxers. Thank you. Anti-vaccination movement, anti-vaxxers. It's a dangerous movement. It's based on pseudoscience. Right now, there's legislation in effect that is starting out in New York, and it's basically going to force parents of children that are not vaccinated to basically not bring their kids into public. I think it's a good idea, and after speaking with you a little bit today, I'd like to encourage you all to take part in legislation, should it come locally, to take part in voting legislation such as this into effect. First off, the anti-vaccination movement is not based in any factual claim. Vaccination has been around since roughly 1721. They started in mostly European countries. They saw things like smallpox coming up and they realized, hey, this is going to kill a whole lot of people, so we need to do something about this. So they started basic experimentation, which was kind of rudimentary and barbaric, so people kind of had a little bit of a problem with scientists coming along and going, I'm going to borrow you, and you, and we're going to take you and we're going to inoculate you with blood from people who have had smallpox, and basically just wait around and watch you till you die. Or until you get better. If you get better, well, we're going to take your blood, and then we're going to do the same thing to the rest of the population. We're going to come up with a vaccine to keep people safe. Some people had a problem with that, but through trial and error, we did come up with better vaccination processes and came up with the things that we needed to keep people safe from diseases. Later on, people started to get better. Scientific method improved, and we got better at the processes of making these vaccines. Come about in 1900s, 1920s, 30s. They got really good at developing the things and got better at the process of giving vaccinations. People started having issues with it because we weren't able to keep the vaccines safe for long periods of time, so they added additives, chemicals to keep them safe. Well, people had issue with the additives and the chemicals, the preservatives in the vaccines. Unfortunately, some of the reactions were deadly, like any kind of anaphylactic reaction. So some children were dying because of the vaccination. It wasn't because of the vaccine itself, it was because of the additive. So again, you kind of added a little bit of doubt to people's minds as far as the efficacy of vaccinating their children. Later on, more contemporary times now, the anti-vax movement was kind of kicked into gear by a physician named Andrew Wakefield. He's a British physician. Around 1980, 1990s, he started doing studies on children over in Europe, Britain, who were having issues with vaccination. Same thing, kind of the additive reactions that kids were having. He started to kind of draw some correlations between the vaccines and issues that kids were having. He did a lot of studies. He put out a lot of papers. They were published in some British medical journals. He was heralded as a foremost author on vaccine reactions with children. He also at that time was trying to develop a single-dose measles shot that he was trying to sell to the pharmaceutical companies. A mother came to him because her child had autism and said, I noticed you've done this work here. What do you think? Is there a relation between vaccinations and autism? So he was starting to look into it. Right about that time, he got denied. The vaccine corporation shut him down for his measles vaccination. suggestions, so he took up the mantle as far as the measles vaccination causing autism in children. He published some papers, and everybody thought there was beginning to be a correlation between the autism and the measles vaccine. Well, later on, people started looking into his documentation and data that he presented. They realized he had no factual subjects in his studies. He had totally fabricated all of the documentation that he put in this publication. The British Medical Society disbarred him, took away his license to practice medicine, but not unfortunately before he came to the United States and got a fan base on YouTube, Facebook, places like that, platforms like that, and was backed by people like Jenny McCarthy and other stars who kind of got on the bandwagon of anti-vaccination. Speaking of the social media, right now we live in a time where pretty much the majority of our opinions are dictated by social media, by the latest meme, by the latest repost, things like that. The anti-vaccination movement has over 150 pages right now on social media, on YouTube, on Instagram, and Twitter. If you start out a brand new Facebook account, you've put no identifying data in your Facebook account, and you put a search for vaccination, the first 6 searches you will get will be for anti-vaccination websites. So there's a huge problem right now that even the CEO of Facebook and Twitter have come out to address as far as disseminating misinformation online and it being a very, very motivating factor to people's ideas. They're starting to institute more securities in the social media platform to take away the anti-vaccine movement as well as other false fake news platforms' ability to put these things out there and misinform public about very important positions like vaccinating their children. The anti-vaccination movement has gone so far as to create fake patient IDs on physician grading platforms like HealthGrades and VitalWatch. Has anybody seen that online? Kind of like Yelp for your doctor or travel advisor. You can go onto these platforms and put in your physician, and you can get basically patient satisfaction surveys for physicians' practices and different providers in your local area. There's been a couple of physicians lately that have come against anti-vaxxers online. They've fought them with credible science, and the anti-vaxxers have gone on to HealthGrades, VitalWatch, created fake patient identification accounts, and slammed these people. These people have seen the results of that in low patient satisfaction scores, and in the case of one physician in New England, her business about closed up because she wasn't getting any patient referrals because people were going online and looking, and they were looking at all these, this is a horrible doctor, and they would go back and research, and it wasn't any patients that she'd actually factually legitimately seen. It was false accounts set up because she had an interaction online and a very firm stance on vaccinating children and against the anti-vaccine movement, had an interaction online. So they basically tried to ruin her reputation and her professional reputation really online because she fought them with credible science. Like I said before, there's been a resurge in measles outbreaks. Right now, the children that have not been vaccinated, they're getting older, they're traveling outside of the country. They're traveling to countries that do not have the vaccination programs or protocols that we have. They're going into areas and being exposed to measles, to mumps, to whooping cough. And the incubation period on these diseases are a little bit longer, so they're bringing them back. Hence the stories everybody's seeing where airports are having to call people that have been in the airport because they've had 1 or 2 people come through that they know have been diagnosed with measles. They're bringing it in from other countries. They're carriers. The majority of cases, measles can kill vulnerable populations. We have populations of elderly that are vulnerable. They're not sure. People are getting older, and we're unfortunately outgrowing our immunity as children who were vaccinated in the early 30s, 40s. And there's also immunosuppressed people and kids that haven't been vaccinated yet. These are vulnerable populations that are in public. From January 1st to March 28th, 2019, 387 cases of measles were reported in the United States. That's the second greatest number of measles, second largest measles outbreak in the United States since 2000, when the CDC declared that measles had been eliminated based on our vaccination program. So what's happening is these kids are going out and bringing it in, and then it's spreading. Legislation has been drafted and enacted in New York prohibiting unvaccinated children from public places. Public places are defined as places accessible to infants, children, and the elderly, populations we talked about as being the most vulnerable to disease. Parents of unvaccinated children willfully violating this bill will be subject to fines. This is the first step by local government in an attempt to force parents to adhere to scientifically proven methods of disease control and elimination. It only makes sense to vaccinate your children, if not for you or your children, for everyone else you or your child would come in contact with. So what I'd like to kind of encourage you all today is, should legislation like that come into our local area, that you all consider it very carefully and vote to enact policies prohibiting unvaccinated children from public places.